What would it be like if everything worked out okay? Imagine a mistake, or maybe not even a mistake, but something went really bad and you had no control and lost everything. In ancient times, in the context of our reading from Deuteronomy, that could lead to becoming a debt slave, a slave because of a debt. How could things work out in that situation? Becoming a debt slave is just like probably the kind of slavery you might imagine. But instead of being born a slave, life went wrong and you became one. Maybe you sold yourself into slavery because you saw no other choices. Or maybe you invested in a business venture that turned out to be a bad business venture. And instead of instead of being able to use the system and declare bankruptcy and try to restructure those debts, your debt collector showed up and said, "You work for me now." The daily grind of slave life might feel like it has no end. And you might be saying to yourself, "I'm going to be doing this forever." And then, after 6 years, the debt collector shows up again and says, "You're free." That's unbelievable. When we climb inside of Deuteronomy and we hear about this kind of freedom for the captives, it just sounds implausible. But then again, we're all about the unbelievable. We follow an itinerant rabbi who went around healing and feeding people. He loved them where they were, not where they should be, but he loved them right where they were. He challenged them to go beyond what they could imagine. And then he had to go and rise from the dead. The distinguishing characteristic between a family of faith like ours and really nice secular humanists is this unbelievable grace and transformative love. This transformative love can take many different forms. So often people associate church like this with rules. And when we look at passages in the Hebrew Bible, it can feel like we've got this rules-based religion. It's what seems to be on the page. Our Old Testament lesson is no exception. When we look at Deuteronomy 15, it addresses the third of 3 variations on Sabbath laws. Now, you know the Sabbath that comes from the 4th commandment, both in Exodus and in Deuteronomy. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And as is the case with almost anything of value, it's really not that simple. It's not that simple because faith is about transformation. It isn't a transaction where we do something and God does something for us. In this case, we keep the Sabbath, we keep it holy, whatever that means, and then God does something for us. That's a transaction. This is all about transformation. Sabbath keeping finds its basis in God's love for us. There's a rhythm of life, like in the Gaia hypothesis, which suggests that all life is intertwined and interdependent. In the Bible, we see references to this holistic view of the world. For example, Psalm 24, "The earth is the Lord's and everything that is in it." And so when we look at Sabbath keeping, we find a reflection of our consciousness of the divine order of time. It means that time is as much a gift of God as this territorial domain of space. That's why Jesus said Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. Yet any notion of Sabbath keeping violates this transactional world we live in. Pausing to spend time in reflection and prayer and worship and rest is anathema to the profit-driven world, the productive culture of the 21st century. Even when people get the notion of Sabbath keeping, well, like it's so often the case, when God gives something good, we use our creativity to find a way to pervert it into our own purpose. And it's so easy to let that lead down the path of excluding God from our Sabbath. I just need some me time. I just need some me time. Maybe that's the case. We all need some time for ourselves, but not when we exclude God and prevent God from transforming our lives. That's what Deuteronomy 15 is all about, radical transformation. This triptych of these 3 different Sabbath variations follows a regular pattern. The first one begins with tithing, and it's at the end of Deuteronomy 14, and it follows the agricultural year. It follows that rhythm of life of planting, growth, and harvest. The second one is about debt. For those following this sacred observance of time, the law means that debt shouldn't last forever. That's the beginning of Deuteronomy 15, the part just before our reading, verses 1 through 11. And it's radical and unbelievable to say that debts should be forgiven. And the third part, our reading, focuses on what at the time was debt slavery. And again, the law says servitude shouldn't last forever. Again, this is radical and subversive. These 3 variations on the Sabbath theme break the cycle of poverty. Whether it was illness, a drought, crop failure, bad decisions, or even just poor cash management, regardless of the reason, this ancient law provides an exit ramp to suffering and servitude. After someone provides 6 years of labor, the one who received the free labor needs to let the one who provided it go. One commentator writes about this passage, 2 of our most common assumptions about the nature of human existence are shattered on the sabbatical principle of the Old Testament. These 2 common assumptions about the way humans live are shattered in these verses. The first one is that time is linear and not cyclical or repeatable. And the second one is the causal nexus of events cannot be broken or interrupted. The second one is, it is what it is. We think of time as moving in one direction. Whether we were looking at the world as a living, breathing organism, or recognizing the repeated cycles in life, God transforms time and can move in any direction. Freeing slaves recognizes this pattern of life. The second assumption in this passage shatters the idea that things will never change. Life is full of changes. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus was right. Change is a constant. We see change unfolding in our lives today as a church. As God moves through these changes, the act of freeing slaves gives life. The law in Deuteronomy recognizes the benefit the landowner would have received from the free labor. So it makes sure to say, don't send your slave out empty-handed. Provide liberally out of your flock. In other words, you should be grateful you've had a free servant and be happy to send that one out with resources to begin a new life. This is a calling to generosity. The literal expression in Deuteronomy 15:14 is, you shall make a rich necklace for him or her. And the passage is explicit about saying male and female slaves. Out of your flocks, your threshing floor, out of your wine press, you should be generous. It's saying we should load her with products from all of our resources. The released person should have the resources to establish a place in society. When we look around and think about those who have less than we do, we remember this sabbatical year. Working for 6 years should be enough to break the cycle of poverty. And that's God's justice. Not only is this lesson from Deuteronomy about giving something away, it's about being generous in what we give. Just because there are poor people doesn't mean we have to accept things as they are. In ancient time, this poverty led to slavery. Today, things aren't so different. People can still be in an endless cycle of repeating this poverty cycle, repeating this debt cycle, and feel like they're slaves to the system. And the Deuteronomistic authors, called ancient Israelites, and in turn, us who read passages like this and seek to apply them to our lives, to be generous and exercise liberality and consonant with the blessings we have received. So this month, as we talk about food insecurity, and we talk about feeding the hungry, we can take this lesson. We can try to find ways to live it out. Whether it's dinner with Andrew and partnering with Domino's Pizza to feed those who don't have enough to eat. Or whether it's bringing in food for the Venable backpacks so that kids who didn't do anything to be in that situation can have something to take home with them and eat when they go home to an empty cupboard. Or the deacon's ministry of freeze drying. Whatever it is, this is one of those meaty, rich, dense passages that if you've ever done one of those read the Bible in a year things, you get to like Deuteronomy 15 and Leviticus, Numbers, these types of places, and you go, I can do this. I'm literate. I can read the words on the page. And then you get through the page and you go, all right, let's go to Matthew and find some, something I can understand. And then we see, blessed are the poor in spirit, and we just don't get that either. Thank you. I appreciate it when the choir is with me. Everything is going to work out okay. Even when we imagine it isn't. Even when we feel like this cycle, whatever is happening, is endless, and it's just going round in circles. God is still God. We're not. And we can live in faith, move in faith, and trust that God is with us. Amen.